Stories that matter. The journey of life from birth to death is an extraordinary trip, sometimes filled with great joy and excitement, but at other times filled with pain, sorrow, and disappointment. Stories That Matter shares both extremes with you. Sometimes our stories will make you feel very happy, but the journey of life is not all happiness. Other times, the journey of life will make you feel sad, for all of us have experienced both extremes. Stories That Matter will begin right after the break with a story that will touch your heart in the journey of life.
Welcome to Stories That Matter. I'm your host, Doug Thompson, with my special guest today is John Anderson. And I've been looking forward to doing this interview because I've known John for many, many years. And it's going to be a tough one for John because John always does the interviews. And here he is now. He's sitting here. And as we were talking, John thinks, well, what do I have to say? What's going to be? I don't have anything to say. He wants to ask all the questions. You'll be able to tell us apart because John's wearing glasses. And the other thing is I have the really deep voice. Even though John's able to make it sound like he has the deep voice, I actually have the deep voice.
Well, thank you for those kind words, Doug.
Well, they weren't kind yet, John.
Yeah, it's been. I don't know that I've ever been interviewed.
I don't suppose
so. A couple times, but I can't remember.
Well,
when it was,
we're going to do it today because here's the thing why I wanted to talk to you, John. This is, of course, Stories That Matter. Everybody's got stories that matter, and they're all different types.
Sure.
And for most people in Abilene, when they say, well, do you know John Anderson? Sure, I know him. And no, wait a minute, I don't know him, but I've always heard his voice, and he always comes on when there's bad weather, and he gives the news, and he does those things. And it's what I call the Lucille Ball syndrome, because when television first got started, and Lucy would go to the grocery store close by to where she lived, and people would come up to her and they would start talking to her, and then they would finish the conversation and walk away, and Lucy was going, why can't I remember who that is? That person knows me. Why can't I remember him? And then after about a couple of weeks of this happening, and then she asked somebody, she said, well, how do I know you? And she said, well, you're in my house every Saturday night. What do you mean? Well, you're on television. I'm in your living room. And so then she realized the power of television. And the same is true for radio. Everybody knows John Anderson. They know the voice John Anderson. And so what I'm anxious to know about John is where'd John come from?
Well, I grew up in a small town. The distance from here to Topeka would have been about the distance from the small town to Winnipeg in the Manitoba province. So the Red River Valley, and my grandparents and my great-grandparents were the settlers there. Built the first Kungsfinger church out in the country. So a lot of pastors and ministers on my mother's side as such. So small town, but a great childhood, just a great childhood, yeah.
Siblings? I
have one brother still living, and I had a sister passed on a couple, 3 years ago, and of course both my parents passed on some time ago, yeah.
So how did you get involved in radio, John?
Well, when I was in high school, I competed, they called it speech then, they have another word for it now, and all the judges kept putting down, you should go in the radio, right? And I did very well. I got a superior rating, which,
I'm sure.
In Minnesota at that time, I would be competing with people in Minneapolis, St. Paul. So, and I did a speech, non-original oratory called A Church Such as Ours. It was a 14-minute speech, and that's what got me thinking about, I wanted to be a cartoonist, is what I wanted to be. But tough, real tough with, going to a small school to do something like that. And I'm glad I didn't, because I'd be out of a job today, had I. So, yeah, that's where I grew up. Anyway, and I got into radio. I went to 2 different schools, one that ABC owned, John Cameron Swayze, and I forget the name of the other guy. He was a basketball player at the time, started a school in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Oh. And went up there. It was probably about 6 months, and I thought, no, I don't think so.
It was a broadcasting school?
Well, it was in television, but I was learning classical music. I wanted to be a rock and roll disc jockey, as they call them. They don't call you that anymore, I guess. No, you're a radio personality, which I'm still trying to figure out what that is. So I did a couple years in the Army, I had a draft number of 58.
Where were you stationed?
I went to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri,
Yeah.
Little Korea, as they called it.
Right.
I don't know if they still call it that or
I don't
not.
know.
You know, so, but anyway, when I got out, I went to Brown's Institute in Minneapolis, St. Paul, which turned into Brown's College, and it was owned by CBS at the time, and that's how I got my foot in the radio. And
Well, did you go there specifically, John, for training for radio, or did you feel like you already had that ability and you were trying to land a job?
At that time, all the teachers there were out of markets like L.A. My news teacher was out of Chicago. They'd all had experience in radio in that way. So I took courses on advertising, marketing, television, interpretation, and goes on and on. Very, very strict school. If you didn't maintain at least what would be a 3-point grade average, they expelled you.
Because somebody else wanted that position.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, that was just the rules. They didn't want anybody coming out of that school that wasn't a Browns person, so to speak.
Okay.
And so you had to maintain a certain level. And I took electronics there as well. So I spent a couple, 3 years there.
Gave you a lot of opportunities.
Yeah.
John, we're going to cut away, take a
Yeah,
break.
sure.
And we'll be right back. You're watching Stories That Matter with John Anderson. Welcome back to Stories That Matter. I'm your host, Doug Thompson, with my special guest, John Anderson. Many of you would know John from KABI and other call letters from throughout the area. And we were just talking with John, been in school, and then John, your first job from there, where do you go?
I was at what we call double KBJ, which is in Bemidji, Minnesota. And I did overnights, and I did college sports, but Bemidji State Teachers College, swimming was their big deal.
So you called the swimming events.
Yeah, there was a lot of hockey, high school, and whatnot. And then I did sports action in the North Country with John Anderson from the Country Kitchen. They gave me $20 and all the Paul Bunyan rolls I could eat.
Was that a weekly program?
That was every Saturday morning.
How old were you then, John? You were back from the military.
Boy.
You'd have been 23.
Yeah, somewhere around. I wasn't very old.
Okay.
And the sports director from the university was there every Saturday morning, and the high school hockey coach was there. The basketball coach from the college, nicest guy you would ever meet, could not win a game if his life depended on it. So Saturday after Saturday, I'm in there, and finally, I don't know what to ask him anymore. So I said, what's going on with you? Are you taking all your shots from the locker room? Because you're not making any out on the floor. And of course, that's when I got fired.
Well, you only said what everybody was thinking too, listening to it.
Well, it was a different time.
Yeah.
And sports directors, especially at the university level, are very politically sensitive people, which I found out early on. So from there, you'll love this story. I'm getting offers all over. Back then, there was no internet, so I'm out of a job. I go to the library and I start looking up radio stations in the yellow pages, and I start sending out resumes and tapes,
Yeah.
But I'm getting calls.
Well, it's working.
Yeah. So I finally figured that I might have a job somewhere in the middle of Wisconsin, all right? As I've been talking to program directors, and so I'm show up there, and I check into the local motel and give a call, and he says, well, you're a week late. I said, what? He had hired me a week ago, didn't know, because I got him confused with somebody else. So I put the phone down, and all of a sudden the phone rings. It's a program director from a 50,000 watt clear channel station in Roswell, New Mexico, all right? And he says, where are you? All right? I said, what? He says, you were supposed to be here yesterday. All right? So I said, well, I'm in the middle of Wisconsin. He says, well, bring me some cheese. And so I got in my point and purchase station wagon, which was all rusted out in the bottom, and I could only make right turns
I have a number
with
of those, yeah.
Yeah, you know, one of those deals. And I got there, and it scared me, because all of a sudden I'm on a 50,000 watt clear channel station. I just got fired from my first job. You know. But that's where I got my programming job, because there was a gentleman by the name of Jim Hughes, and the engineer, a guy by the name of Ed Sullivan. He's passed on years ago. And he used to be he was the program director one time at El Paso at a radio station. Hired these two kids out of college, which was Jim Hughes and Sam Donaldson. Right? And Ed would say he just couldn't get Donaldson to understand that he needed to introduce records. All he wanted to do was read the news. So, but anyway, Jim Hughes was looking for a program director for one of his stations, because he owned a number of stations, and I met with him and got my first programming job that way.
So Sam Donaldson's roommate.
Yeah.
Got you the first job there.
Well, he listened to me on the air, and then met with me and offered me the job, and I said, well, okay, and I didn't know what I was doing,
but you were learning.
But he didn't know that.
Yeah, he didn't know it. It seemed like you did.
Learn as you go.
So anyway, how do you get from there to Kansas?
Well, I beat mixed in a club for a while. And I went back to the 50,000 watt clear after about 3 years or so, because they said, hey, come on back whenever you want. Yeah, and I kind of wanted to go back, so I went back there as a program director at that point. I worked in the club circuit doing beat mixing music for a while, and then wanted to get into the top 100 market, so I went to Columbia, South Carolina, and kept knocking on doors, and I kept bothering these people at the oldie station. They were brand new on the air, and finally they got tired of me coming on by, and they put me on overnights. Right. And
you were used to that?
Yeah. Well, they always do that in the larger markets, because they don't want you to be messing up all the words.
Right.
You know what I mean? So anyway, what happens is I get a call from the general manager, and I knew that the guy from 7 to midnight was leaving, so I thought, I got it. I got that 7 to midnight shot. Right. So I pressed the white shirt and put a tie on. You know. Which was probably the wrong thing to do, but I wanted to make sure, you know. So I get in there, and all of a sudden there's another gentleman sitting there, a guy by the name of Mike Willis, and there's Pam May, who had been featured in Playboy magazine, Women of Radio. And Frank Baker, the general manager, looks at me and he says, I heard you last night, and I'm wondering what the heck you're doing on overnights. How would you like to do the morning show with these two people? And I go, whoa, you know. So the next thing, I got billboards and magazine articles and
wow.
and the whole television commercials, and I believed it, because it was marketing, you know. And then next thing you know, you're going across town to another radio station, because the ratings have so much to do with everything, and they change formats, and I'm going, boy, this is nuts. This is absolutely nuts. So anyway, I went from there to, I wanted to get away from there. Driving to work took 2 hours sometimes, you know. And so I got a job in Wyoming, of all places. That is getting away, trust me.
That's getting away.
Yeah, I just did country music there for a while, and then programmed the network in Nebraska, put the network on the air, actually. And while I was there, this is when I got the job offer here, so I don't know how many states that is, 6 or 7. And I didn't apply for the job.
Somebody just called.
They called me, and they wanted a news person. I said, well, you know, I have directed news departments, but I've never been a news guy. I said, well.
But I know Sam Donaldson.
Yeah, yeah, but I know Sam Donaldson, or at least his roommate. And that's how I ended up here, and that was in March of 1993. So
well, we're going to cut away and take a break.
Okay.
When we come back, we're going to continue to talk with John Anderson. Welcome back to Stories That Matter. I'm your host, Doug Thompson, with my special guest, John Anderson from KABI Radio. And John's been, if you were with us right before break, and if you weren't, why, John wound up in Abilene in 1993 and he's been here since. So we're coming up on 26 years
26
of being in Abilene. And
39 years in radio.
39 in radio
Yeah.
and 26 years in Abilene.
Yeah.
And so, John, over the years, I know you've been over the nation in multiple locations.
Yeah.
So have you interviewed celebrities of all range?
Well, yeah. Hollywood type people, stars, musicians, politicians. The first interview I ever got, which I was real excited about, was Desi Arnaz Jr.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and at that time, he was going through a transition in life. He had been arrested for guns and some kind of Eastern type religion thing he was into.
Okay.
For a long time, I don't remember all of that.
Right.
David Gardino, which was the psychic to the stars.
Yeah.
And he was the psychic for Nancy Reagan and Elvis Presley and Willie Nelson. And I always kind of thought he was an evil man, though. I didn't.
Really?
Yeah, he was kind of a strange one. When I asked him if he believed in God, he wouldn't answer that.
Oh, wow.
You know? So that was always, if he had psychics on, you know. I used to have the angel lady on a lot when I was on Sunday 102.5. A lot of people remember her.
Yeah,
and
I remember that.
Yeah, I still call her up once in a while just to see how she's doing or whatever. But the people I suppose that would stick out, Henry Hill, the real Henry Hill, the mobster that turned on, was it Gotti, I guess?
Yeah,
or
I think
whatever.
that's right.
Yeah, I had him, the guy that found NSYNC, Paul Revere from Paul Revere and the Raiders.
Well, that'd have been a
all
fun
the
one.
monkeys except Michael Nesmith.
Wolfman Jack.
Wolfman Jack. Well, when I worked at the Clear Channel station, I was working for General Electric. He was at WABC in New York at the time, so I could call him up and interact with him and have him do stuff for us.
Was he the same way?
Well,
when you
I
called him
asked
up
his
and
wife
talked?
one time, what is Wolfman Jack like when he's not on the radio? You know, and she said, well, the longer he's been on the radio, the more he's like Wolfman Jack when he's off the radio. So, somebody told me he started out in Topeka. I didn't know that.
I didn't know that either.
But I don't know if that's true or not. I heard that one time. So Larry Hagman, Linda Evans.
Larry Hagman off of Dallas?
Yeah.
And I Dream of Jeannie. Was he on the I Dream of Jeannie show when you interviewed him?
No. This was way after he was this was probably 6 years ago, maybe something like that. Yeah.
And he'd been gone for about that period of time?
Well, he had a liver transplant because he had been his liver had been pickled by alcohol.
Oh yeah.
At one time, so he talked about that a little bit, and things. So yeah, that was afterwards, and of course he talked about the Dallas years and all of that.
What was your feeling about him? Did you like him?
Yeah, he's a real easygoing person, and had a lot of gratitude for getting a second chance in life. And of course, he passed on, not too long after that. Sylvia Brown, she was the psychic too, and I had her interviewed her probably 6 months before she died.
Really?
And she seemed kind of strange on the air at that time. But I mean, the list kind of it goes on and on. Richie Havens, the guy that opened up Woodstock.
But that was an interesting story.
Yeah, it seems like we just kind of gelled. Sometimes you just gel with people.
Yeah.
He was somebody that I just kind of gelled with on the air, real easy to talk to. Olivia Newton-John.
Oh, I bet that was a good interview.
Yeah, people asked for me to replay that, actually. It was around Christmas time, and she had lost her boyfriend at the time, as you recall.
Yeah.
So she was kind of dealing with that,
Yeah.
and she had cancer, of course.
Yeah.
And she's got it again, I
Yeah, that's what I hear.
Yeah.
She's
Just an extremely sweet lady.
Yeah.
Patty Boyd, who was married to George Harrison, and Eric Clapton, interesting lady.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah, talking about the friendship that George and Eric had and stuff, and Kenny Loggins, and I mean I can't remember them all. Just the list goes on and on. But the thing comes to mind that when I realized that radio, very blessed. I don't feel like I've worked a day in my life. So it's probably why I'll never retire.
Yeah.
Why do I want to retire from something that I love to do? Because I don't feel like I'm working to begin with.
Yeah, doesn't feel like work when you love it.
Yeah, but the magical thing happened when I realized it wasn't about me. but it was about other people. And a couple of things that I did that come to mind, rather, was there was one Christmas, and this was about 2 years after 9/11.
Okay.
So I called up Fort Riley, talked to the public affairs people, and I said, I got an idea. I would like to do a show, put it on the radio, and I'd like for you to film it. And it'll be an opportunity for the wives and the children and whomever to come in and say Merry Christmas to their soldier over in Iraq.
Sure.
And they said, yeah, so we got the equipment to do that. So they set the thing up, and I walked into the room where they had it set up on post. I can't recall where it was way off in the middle of nowhere. And I asked them, I said, well, how many people did you invite? And I forget what they said, I think 115. I said, well, how many people showed up? 115. And I never, ever had that. 100% people show up. So I said, well, I'm going to stay on the air till everybody gets a chance. So it wasn't long within the first hour that these, especially the wives, hearing their children, the tears were starting to come.
Sure.
So the tissue box got brought in, and I'm handing these tissues more than I'm doing anything else, and I'm listening, and went on for about 3 hours. And into the 4th hour, all of a sudden I'm listening to somebody, and all of a sudden the tears are rolling down my eyes at this point. And I thought, whoa, this is, this is something. And it was real, afterwards, there was, one of the wives made me a homemade Christmas ornament for a tree, which was real nice. They gave me a hat that had been worn by a soldier over there in a war zone.
Yeah.
And Department of Defense gave me an award, some sort of civilian award.
Yeah.
I forget what it was. I don't even read them as such, really. I mean, it was nice, don't get me wrong. Yeah. And the other, that's the sort of reward you get from doing things that you can't put a monetary value to, that you feel good about. Another story I'll tell you is there's a gal by the name of Linda Underwood. Do you know her over in Clay Center?
No.
She used to work at the post office. I don't know if she's still there. She'd call me up every once in a while, and she'd have somebody that she's trying to help. All right, it would just be off the cuff. So she calls me up one morning and says, well, we got a 15-year-old boy, and he's got cancer bad. But he needs a computer because he still wants to do his schoolwork from the hospital. We need $1,500, John. I said, well, we'll give it a whirl, So I get on the air, and I start asking people for money explain the story with this sick boy. And all of a sudden I get a call, because I'm taking calls, right? And I get a call from this gentleman that's incarcerated. Right? Have you ever been a smoker?
No.
Yeah, I haven't smoked for 23, 24 years, but I did, and it's an extremely addicting thing, cigarettes, extremely. So he says, I have $20 for cigarette money, but I'm going to give it to you for this kid.
Wow.
Right. That's all I have, but he needs it more than I need the cigarettes.
Man, that's awesome.
But what it said to me was, that sometimes we stereotype. People make mistakes, and they get incarcerated. Some people, are a menace to society, so they have to be removed from society, and I get it,
And some people never get caught.
And some people never get caught. Yeah. But this guy gave his last $20 that he had for this extreme addiction that he had to cigarettes because this boy needed it more than
him. And did you raise the $1,500, John?
I raised the $1,500, and sadly enough, the boy died.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
I
that's
understand.
kind of the story.
We're going to cut away and take a break. You're listening to John Anderson. Welcome back to Stories That Matter. I'm your host, Doug Thompson, with my special guest, John Anderson. John, we're out of time, buddy.
Well,
I have really enjoyed visiting with you. Thank you so much. There's a reason that you're so well liked in Abilene, and I hope you've enjoyed this program.